In season 2 of the Best of Health podcast, I am shining a spotlight on all of the life stages of women's health, from menarche to post-menopause. Topics covered will range literally from head to toe, addressing migraines to vaginal health and everything in between. My conversations are going to be with leading experts in their field, and we will tap into a deep well of knowledge and uncover an array of clinical pearls which promise to be an illuminating and helpful support to your personal health journey. So grab a cuppa and join me this autumn for the Best of Health Season 2, Women's Health Uncovered. Welcome back to the Best of Health podcast Season 2, all focusing on women's health. And I am thrilled to be welcoming back another dear friend of mine. This is actually fun. It's like I'm just sort of having a virtual dinner party with all the guests this season. The lovely Emma Beswick, who is the director of Life Code GX. Which we will explain what that amazing company is and how that can benefit your health. Lovely women listening. And Emma is also a fully trained nutritional therapist. We trained together at the College of Naturopathic Medicine in London many years ago. And with the focus today on women's health, we are going to be delving into an area of nutrigenomics, which I will let Emma explain what that means, and how understanding this can help guide us through each different life stage in a much more bespoke way. So Emma, welcome. And welcome to your lovely, amazing brain that we will be delving into. Welcome back.
Oh, thank you so much, Tanya. And yeah, I like the virtual dinner party analogy.
That's how I feel.
That.
Yeah, yeah. Although so it is 10 a.m, so yeah, it's more of a brunch.
I've got my cup of tea.
Yeah. I've just
rather than my cocktail.
Exactly. So Emma, for those of you listening, if you want to go back and listen to season 1, Emma spoke very beautifully explaining what nutrigenomics is, but I think it would be a really wonderful intro into this particular podcast episode today, if you could just explain what nutrigenomics is in sort of lay terms, and how that information relates specifically to our topic today of sort of women's health.
So thank you. So nutrigenomics is a specialism within genomics. Mm-hmm. And if you take that up a step, genomics is all about genes and how genes interact with our environment in order to result in health or maybe not so good health. And it can also influence or control certain really physical obvious things like eye colour or hair colour. So this is genomics, the big topic. Mm-hmm. Whereas nutrigenomics is focused on nutrition and lifestyle and how those things interact with our genes. So the biggest difference, and I think the biggest power of nutrigenomics, is that although our genetic code is fixed, and that's part of the picture, the environment and our nutrient status and our nutrient input is flexible, and we can change this. Mm-hmm. We can adjust those aspects of our life, our environment, to complement our genetics. Or if we don't understand this topic and we don't know our genetics, we might inadvertently be doing things that clash with our genes.
That's really interesting. So to unravel that tiny little bit there that you said, so all of our proteins and our enzymes are coded for by these genes, and they all have slight, what we call variants. So they're slight, just tiny little glitches, which we all have. Nobody has. We all have. And so what you're saying is that if we, with this knowledge, we can sort of circumnavigate some of these, where these glitches are, because they can be upregulated or downregulated through nutrition and lifestyle components.
Exactly. So in some cases, it's as if there is a certain nutrient that is processed in the body, but it needs to go through various steps in order to be active and do its jobs and contribute to our health. But in some cases, someone might have a little almost nick taken out of the gene. So it's as if you've got a fence post or a stake of wood, but maybe there's a little nick taken out of it, so it's not quite so steady and it's not quite so stable. But we can use other nutrients as the splint for that stake, that fence, to strengthen it.
What a great analogy. I'm going to steal that one, but I will credit you, of course. But that's a great one.
It's a new one.
Yeah, I like that. That's great. And so in season 1, we talked sort of quite broadly around sort of certain nutrients from your nutrient core panel, which looks at where there are little chinks in as how we can assess how individuals are, where their chinks are related to vitamin D, the vitamin D receptor, vitamin A, B12, or broadly, and so in a whole array of foundational nutrients.
Exactly. I would say those are the foundations. They cover the vitamins, which are the essential nutrients that we can't make, as well as some things that affect how those nutrients are activated. But they are the foundation. It's as if that is the foundation of your building, and you want to make sure that those are covered, and then you're starting to do the building design above ground.
Absolutely.
Once you've got that covered, and you know that you've stabilised any parts of that need that little bit of extra help.
Great. So before we come on to, which I'm so excited about, your newest updated female panel, could we use vitamin D as an example from which appears on a number of your reports, but could we use vitamin D as an example of a foundational nutrient, and in terms of what we can assess for to I guess elucidate what the benefits of running this panel does, and how that compares to looking at a blood test result of vitamin D. I've heard you explain that before, and I think it's a really helpful example.
I think it's helpful because there are different aspects of genes and nutrients. So with vitamin D, for example, there is a gene that means the protein that carries vitamin D from our skin to our kidneys to our liver to the cells where it does its jobs is less good at performing that taxi role. And this is your analogy, the taxi. So
it's like one of the wheels has fallen off the taxi.
Yeah, exactly. So the chink is in that gene. It's a 3-wheel taxi. It's not as good at performing that transport role. And so the vitamin D, more of it is lost on the journey. Less of it reaches its destination, even if the start point is the same. So 2 people could have lots of sunshine exposure. They might eat oily fish, which is another good source of vitamin D, and they might have almost identical intakes, but one of their taxis is 3 wheels and the other is 4.
Perfect.
So the one with the 3 wheels, their levels of vitamin D, if they were to do a blood test, would likely to be lower. They're losing it.
And then there is another chink that you test for sort of further down the chain, isn't there? Which is the receptor.
So yes, the VDR or vitamin D receptor is about how sensitive the cells are to vitamin D. So when it arrives, it's how well are those cells responding to the vitamin D? How good are they at hearing the message? And again, some people have a variance, a little chink in those receptors. I kind of think of them as radars.
Yeah, me too.
Which mean that they're not so good at hearing the message. So actually the message needs to be louder for those people. And how that translates to the vitamin D is that we need the actual level to be higher.
I think and I've saw you wrote a great post on social a couple of months ago, and I think that is really an important piece there. So when we know this information, if your receptors are a bit deaf, you can then know that your requirement for vitamin D is higher when you're measuring that in blood. It's higher than someone that doesn't have this chink in the receptor, because you need to shout louder at those receptors because your receptors are a little bit deaf.
Exactly that. And if you have the deaf or the less well hearing receptors, then that can mean that you might have a okay level of vitamin D as far as your doctor is concerned. They'll say that it's fine, it's normal kind of message if you were tested, but it's not good enough for you in terms of a healthy optimum level. And we find that people in that situation might be more prone to experiencing low mood in winter.
Yes.
For example, really common. You know, why do some people experience that? Well, there are a whole range of reasons, but vitamin D is possibly the biggest reason, and the thing that
I see it all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Easiest to resolve as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is the beauty
and pain as well. And we'll come on to this, but when we look at your reports, we see we see this gene all over the place. So, and this is the point, is that we're not testing these in isolation. And this is the beauty of your reports, is that there is a whole pattern. So, for example, Emma was just talking about mood. So there is Life Coach GX has a nervous system report. And so it looks at the entire pathway of making serotonin. And we see the vitamin D receptor all across that pathway. So it's rather than looking at one gene in isolation, that is so not beneficial. It's about taking a helicopter view and looking at the much broader picture and overlaying that in terms of the client's case history.
Yeah, and you're right, that particular gene does appear in so many reports because it's got so many jobs and so many functions.
Yeah,
it's so important.
Yeah.
Hence why we want to, if there was one thing probably that I suggest that people want to know, it's that genetically.
Vitamin D.
Yeah.
Interesting. Gosh, you've pinned your money on that. That's your favourite, isn't it? Okay.
Current favourite.
Good to know. So, we have hopefully we have a broader understanding of this amazing tool that we can use, Nutrigenomics, and as it relates to female health and specifically sort of hormones, you have an estrogen panel, and you have sort of added to that and changed the name to upgrade it with some really, really much more information, the hormone panel. And it really helps women, or your practitioner help you understand how you are set up to produce, i.e. make your hormones, receive it at the receptor, and then how you can clear it. So from how your hard drive is set up to be able to function with or without glitches, and how your practitioner can help you navigate where those glitches are. So I think should we talk around that a little bit more in terms of if we talk about the sort of the production of our hormones, and there are some certain sort of highlights, if you like, in terms of how there can be a preferential. So when we produce genes, when we produce hormones from cholesterol, there are certain factors that can contribute to maybe more of a preference for some either estrogen or testosterone.
Absolutely. So we talk about balance a lot. It's kind of becoming a slightly overused term, I think, but we basically need all of these hormones, whether we are male, female, whatever stage of life we're at. We want the hormone production to be optimal. We want, as you said, we want to be able to understand how we hear the messages. And you can have the opposite of the VDR. You can have an oversensitive hearing scenario as well. And then how we deactivate and clear hormones. And this is important no matter who you are or how old you are, whatever, whether you're making hormones endogenously, whether you're taking hormones externally, and everyone will fall into this category, you are exposed to environmental sources of things like estrogens. So we all need to make sure that this process is working in a helpful, protective way rather than a potentially damaging way.
Great.
And I think probably the best way of looking at this is to drill into some of these hormones, isn't it? And talk about that.
So let's talk a little bit firstly before clear about sort of the fate maybe of estrogen. So what that means is so we produce estrogen, and then those practitioners listening will know, but let's explain when we say the fate of estrogen, what does that mean within our bodies?
So ultimately we want it to, there's a great phrase that is use it then lose it. And so we want the kind of fresh estrogen and the system for producing estrogen to be working in a nice, regular, smooth way. And the brain detects how much of these hormones that are present, and it might up or down regulate the production of the hormones. And then the hormones do their messaging, a bit like vitamin D. Vitamin D is a hormone, actually, isn't it?
Yes, it is, which actually I interviewed Dr. Nikki Kay a couple of weeks ago, and she was extolling the virtues of vitamin D. So you will definitely have a vitamin D love affair with her. And she was very, very quick to tell me it was a hormone.
And so the hormones, the steroid hormones, so really we're talking here about estrogen is the big one that people tend to focus on, and that's the one that they think about first. But of course there is testosterone, there is progesterone, and things like cortisol, absolutely massive, that interacts with the sex hormones, the sex steroid hormones. And we use a term, I think this is better than balance actually. It's about the dance of the hormones.
Yes.
And how they interact with each other and sometimes lead each other and sometimes promote each other and at other times block each other, so that the cyclical nature of hormone levels in some people is regular and maintained, but also and I think this is the fate part, is the fate is ultimately how the hormones are then cleared. And it's like you want that whole process to be working really, really smoothly, to make room for the new. And probably the biggest single problem in this whole process is around clearance.
Okay, that's interesting. So to paraphrase that, if I may, at the top of the chain, we have, and Emma's Life Code GX's report beautifully display this, is that at the top of the chain, we have the hypothalamus and the pituitary, which are the conductors of the orchestra of all of our hormones. And there are numerous environmental impacts that will communicate through the hypothalamus that will then impact the either upregulation or downregulation. So either having your foot on the accelerator pedal or not, to then communicate to either the ovaries, testes, or the adrenal glands to release cortisol, or the thyroid, in terms of its production then of its relevant hormone. So Emma's Life Code GX's report have numerous genes that there can be chinks in, that can be taken into account in terms of how each individual person personally is able to cope with, say, cortisol. So my favorite is the FKB-P5, but you don't need to worry about that. But it's such a amazing tool, because it can mean that someone, if they have a chink, they've got their foot on the gas pedal the whole time with cortisol. So whatever your stressor is, it's like over revving that cortisol the whole time.
Yeah, and that's much more in this world that we are living in, the modern world, that pathway, that cortisol part of the picture in most people, I would say, is already overworking. And so if you, on top of that, have a genetic predisposition for that to run away, it's kind of the slightest thing. It's kind of waiting for that signal and that trigger, and it's just going to run with it. It's going to be like, well, okay, I've got it. I'm going into overdrive. And whereas that might have been even beneficial ancestrally, back in the day, when it was about running away from danger, it was very physical. Today, we might generate cortisol that promotes the release or the breakdown of various resources to make energy, sugar. Our blood sugar will rise. But if we don't actually use that energy, then that sugar will potentially be converted to fat and visceral fat. And so hence you have the pattern of stress resulting in weight gain. You lose muscle, you gain weight in places that you don't want to gain weight. You might actually be setting up a risk or increasing the risk of diabetes and things as serious as that. And even more so in some people who have the chinks in the wrong place, so to speak. So it's
and that is the point, isn't it? So so someone listening say, well, what does that mean to me? It's coming back to where you are in your life stage, and if you have this particular variant, then when you come into a different life stage, say for example perimenopause, where we have a higher or more erratic estrogen unopposed to progesterone as an example, then there is going to be more pressure put on that particular variant, because you're adding in more inflammation essentially. So this is how we can beautifully navigate by mapping your life stage and your case across this really personal information.
And it's all about the so what. It's not about telling you that, oh, it's bad news, you've got this, really undesirable genetic profile that just means that you're at risk of weight gain, low energy, losing muscle mass, all those things. It's about understanding exactly where these chinks are and then how to support them.
In relation to where you are right now.
Exactly. And they can be supported. That is the whole point, is that it's empowering, genuinely empowering, because if you know where the chinks are, then you know where to kind of put the splints.
Yeah.
Whereas if you don't know, you're just guessing, and you might end up taking loads of supplements. You might end up saying, I can't have, you know, any caffeine, any alcohol. I can't have it. It's not about the can't, it's about the can.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Actually, that's a really beautiful segue into an example that I think is very relevant that I'll share with the audience. I ran this report, and it became in sort of quite a young woman who has 2 young children, has a very, very stressful work life, wants to lose weight, and but does most of the childcare herself, and uncovered that there was a chink in this particular gene. And she was getting up at 5 a.m. to do a HIIT class before school. And I personally felt that was that is a stressor that is not advantageous. And because of losing sleep, not having that quality 7 hours sleep, to try and do some really physical exercise was not the right form of exercise in that environment. So it's about, let's make a better decision on the timing and what form of exercise you can do with this particular genetic setup, as an example.
Yeah, that's a really, really great example. I mean, so sleep and sleep is massive. And so whereas that's a fairly generic statement, we can drill in to say, well, how would your genes kind of impact different needs for sleep, rather than just saying, well, everyone needs sleep, don't they? Well, yeah, they do. But for some people, that sleep deprivation or deficit is going to be more of an issue in the short term as well as the long term.
Yeah.
For some people more than others. And so, for example, in the hormones report, we include melatonin, the sleep hormone.
Yeah.
And there is a gene that impacts our hearing of melatonin. So melatonin is an antioxidant. I think of it as it sweeps out the brain of all the debris from the day.
Yes.
And refreshes it for the next day.
Yeah.
So it's getting rid of all the rubbish. And if you don't get rid of all the rubbish, then you will likely have more inflammation, for example.
Absolutely.
Which none of us want. Too much inflammation, and
no, and definitely not in the brain. I mean, it is absolutely, it's a hoover, it's a brain hoover, a sweeper, whatever, but it's clearing out tangles and junk, DNA junk.
Yeah. And the other thing that the melatonin does, melatonin actually suppresses insulin, and insulin is another hormone. And if you think about what insulin is usually there for, insulin is usually released when there is blood sugar, because it balances the blood sugar, so it's moving the sugar to the muscles or to the storage or wherever it should be, but it's trying to stop it being too high in the bloodstream. Now, if you have the chink on a melatonin receptor, it means that it suppresses insulin more than usual. So melatonin normally suppresses insulin because you shouldn't have a lot of blood sugar overnight because you're expected to be asleep.
Yeah.
If you have this chink, it suppresses insulin more. And what that means is, if you're getting up at 5 o'clock and you're doing a HIIT class, you are creating that stress. You are producing and releasing, you're telling the body with the cortisol and the adrenaline to release lots of sugar.
Yes.
You might be using some of that in the HIIT, but you're probably not using all of it, and you will still be pumping it out afterwards. But because you're doing it early in the morning as well, there will still be melatonin in your system. It will be suppressing that insulin sugar mover.
How interesting. Yes.
And so the blood sugar balance of that individual will be all over the place. And it's not what we want a lot of the time. And it's kind of back to the balance word in a way, but not really. I prefer the roller coaster analogy that I know you used to. We don't want roller coaster scenarios in terms of peaks and troughs of things like sugar, blood sugar, or hormones. We want a nice wavy line. We want to feel the sensation and the different kind
the ebbs and flows of this natural circadian binaural rhythm of these hormones.
Yeah, but we don't want massive peaks and crashes, because our system is going to be put under much more stress to try and balance that out and to cope with it, and it won't be as successful. So a little bit of stress is a good thing. Yeah. And it's good to keep us flexible and to be able to adapt, but within boundaries, within reason. And so actually getting up at 5 o'clock and doing a HIIT class is worse than doing a HIIT class later in the day.
So especially if you have a chink on that, let's just go back to that, especially because if you have a chink on that, it's suppressing insulin, which we don't want insulin to be super high, but if it's suppressing it, it's not allowing it to do its job, which is to dispose of the glucose that is being made. Right.
It's not able to send it to where it needs to be. So it's released, and you probably get this kind of very like hyper feeling. But then it's not been directed to the right places because the insulin has been sat on by the melatonin, because it's like, you shouldn't be here yet. The body's still doing other things. I'm still doing the cleanup. Like, don't start driving. Don't start driving through the city when the people tidying up the rubbish are still sweeping the roads.
Well, or not in Brighton, as the case may be at the moment. There's no rubbish being cleared up anywhere. But anyway, that's another issue. So that's very interesting. I wonder, I sort of think back to certainly myself in my 20s when I was working in London, and as we all do, burning the candle at every single end possible, and sort of getting up at ridiculous o'clock and going to the gym in the dark, and just trying to sort of fit everything in. So that is very interesting. So I also wonder whether, with the clocks changing as well, sort of when it's dark in the morning, we're not supposed to be getting up and exercising. No. That's very interesting, Emma. Great. I think there'll be lots of people having aha moments with that.
Yeah, I mean, and you're right. You know, we've all done it and patted ourselves on the back for getting up and doing that. But actually, you know, we now have more information.
Yes.
And it's a bit like, 20 years ago, it was bravado if you didn't sleep, wasn't it? It was like, oh, I can get by on 4 hours sleep. How big and cool is that? And now we know that that's terrible for your health, and it's not gonna end well in terms of aging and the brain and things like that. But yeah. So I think
there will be a lot of women listening who are in perimenopause and menopause who are shouting at the screams that, well, I can't sleep because since I'm in this hormonal roller coaster. And I'm hearing you, ladies. So let's unpack that a little bit more, because there are other hormones. Well, certainly sort of the melatonin production is, I can't remember that off the top of my head, but there's definitely vitamin D involved in that as well, isn't there?
Yeah, so vitamin D is actually involved in a lot of the steroid hormone production. So one of the things that it supports is DHEA.
Okay.
And DHEA helps to make testosterone and estrogen. So it's like a store. It's like a storage hormone, and it declines with age.
Yeah.
So I think, there are certainly, don't Google it, but there are lots of companies who historically have tried to sell DHEA as this kind of youth
magic panacea.
Yeah. But it does decline with age. But vitamin D can help support the production of DHEAS, which is the store. It's kind of putting the DHA into the store so that we've got that store to draw on in the future. And vitamin D is a enhancer of that storage ability.
Great. And then let's also talk about, because the other neurohormone that is that in some ways is responsible for that more butterfly feeling when we come into perimenopause, that sort of being able to not feeling that we can cope with all of the things that we used to be able to cope with, and we're not quite sure why, and impacting our sleep, is progesterone and its derivatives. So that, could you help it, and which is on your new report, could you help explain the impact of that in terms of sleep and calm and just calming of the nervous system? And would you be able to talk to that?
Give that a try. So this for me was a huge piece of information that I kind of knew that progesterone was associated with calm in some way, but I didn't really know the detail. And progesterone is converted to, it goes through several steps, but it ultimately ends up as something that is known as ALO-P. That's the short word. And ALO-P is a neurosteroid. So that means that it's a steroid, but it has a neurological impact. And that impact is that it interacts with a GABA receptor, and it has a GABAgenic effect. And GABA is our major inhibitory neurotransmitter.
Love it.
So it is the calm, it's the rest, it's the wind down, it's the thing that allows you and can facilitate sleep as well. It's all part of that cycle, like we talked about, circadian. In terms of, you want your GABA towards the end of the day to start to increase and to just blend into this, relax and calm and prepare for sleep. So how does that fit back to progesterone and genes? Is the progesterone is a precursor, so it's the start point, or the intermediate point for making ALO-P, which has this GABAgenic calming effect. And in fact, that pathway and those genes are more active when we're stressed. The body kicks in a whole load of anti-stress kind of balances, because stress is meant to be a temporary short-term thing. It's not meant to be continuous. And so it very quickly after the stress signals, there is an anti-stress signal, and that includes promoting this ALO-P synthesis, or making more of it. But there are genes involved in this, and some people don't make the ALO-P as efficiently as other people. And there is one gene in particular that can be almost 80% less, or this chink. It's a big chink. In some people,
it's a crater.
It is. It's like, oh, the gene's barely kind of standing up. So people are just naturally genetically less good at that conversion and making the ALO-P. And so that means that their ability to draw on this relaxing, calming neurosteroid is less good. And they might get away with that if they're not experiencing a lot of stress, if they're lucky. But when they do, it might mean that they're less resilient, and their response to that stress is worse in terms of just how they sense it, how they feel that they're coping. And then also, as we lose progesterone, as we get older, then we're losing the start substance for making that LOP as well.
Yeah.
So that could, it can affect different people in different ways at different ages.
Yeah.
And depending what is going on with them. The good news is, as with all the things that we look at, there are ways of stabilising that SNP. Even though it's a big chink, it can still be stabilised.
And this is really powerful for those of you listening. I am so excited about utilising this information. And so, as Emma said, that yes, for women, as we don't ovulate and as often, and then eventually that stops our production from the ovaries of progesterone. The beauty is that because, as Emma mentioned, this is a neurosteroid, so we do still produce some of this in the brain. So there is all, Mother Nature does have things up her sleeve, has coping mechanisms, but understanding where the vulnerabilities are and are also the soup or the environment that you're in, and helping to stabilize where the chinks are. This is all the beauty of this sort of integrated, personalized sort of way of working.
Absolutely. And there are things that we can do directly for that specific gene, but we would also say always look at the bigger picture. So look at the bigger picture in terms of what are the stressors, what is optional stress, and what is compulsory stress.
Yes.
So, really honestly, be honest with yourself. Are you taking on things that you don't have to take on? I'm very bad at saying no. I know, I really, really am.
You are. I told you off last week.
I did that this morning. I actually did say no to a teaching request today. I'm really proud of myself. But it was a big deal because I'm just not good at it. In terms of that, so it's the people pleasing kind of thing. But we get better at that with age. We get better at putting the hand up, or so we should, because we need to.
Well, I think there's something in that actually, Emma, in terms of, and having this information, that's how it's powerful, because we can then actually begin to understand where our vulnerabilities are, and then there are certain life stages that pulls the rug from under us as well, and so then that makes us feel much more unstable. But if we understand where the vulnerabilities are, and we can then learn how to negotiate that terrain with the help of all the amazing practitioners that are out there that understand these reports, then there is absolutely a way to navigate this. And that's how this is so, Nutrigenomics is so helpful, because it helps us navigate the new terrain, which should be exciting and not feeling that we're failing and that we can't do what we did in our 20s. It's just a different way of doing things.
Exactly. And it doesn't mean you can't do anything exciting or stressful.
No, hell no.
And I would say also that in the vein of looking at the bigger picture, it's also about looking across ways. So we can zone in on the specific gene, but understanding what that does. So it's helping support our GABA effect.
Yeah.
But we can also then, if we know there's a weakness there, we can look at how to support our GABA in a bigger way.
Yes.
That is complementary to that progesterone pathway. And make sure, for example, then that we've got a good level of zinc and a good level of B6, because we need those nutrients to make GABA.
Yeah.
And that we're not doing other things that are pulling the rug from beneath that calm GABA system in other places as well.
Yes.
So that's, again, it's the firm foundation and the cushioning and the support. If that is generally broadly strong, then we will be able to weather more of the storm in terms of removing one of the supports.
Perfect. I'm going to ask you one more question, because I know that our time is sort of nearly up. But just a little tip around GABA as well. There are 2 nutrients, but I'm only going to mention one because that helps to just slow the breakdown of GABA. So it helps to keep it at the receptor for longer, just keep it calm, which is rosmarinic acid. So from rosemary. So grow rosemary in your garden, ladies. Just have a sprig of it. I say to my clients, have a sprig of it in each of your coat pockets, in your handbag. And just when you're feeling a little bit anxious, rub it together to release those potent oils and just breathe it in. Just, it's a free, natural, completely free little tip there. So before I let you go, my lovely friend, can I just ask you broadly around on your snapshot the other night, you mentioned the area of HRT, and the question was posed: is running this panel helpful for women that are considering taking HRT or are on HRT? And the answer was a resounding yes. And I suspect that is because this report helps us understand the fates of estrogen. Could you just sort of summarize that in terms of how this can benefit somebody who is considering HRT or who is on HRT and wants a little bit of reassurance?
Yeah, so it's obviously a really big topic.
Yes, of course.
But I think, and I don't just think, it is evident that it is so personal in terms of if people decide that they want to try HRT or take HRT,
Mm-hmm.
there are lots of different ways of doing that as well.
Yeah.
And people, it's not a magic bullet for people often. For some people, it really, really is very quickly a transformational symptom reliever. But for other people, they will have peaks and troughs with HRT, and they struggle to get it right. Mm-hmm. So by understanding the pathways, you can see where that chemical, where that medication, where that hormone is entering the system.
Yep.
And then where you individually, personally direct that chemical, that hormone to go.
Yep.
So it can go down some very protective routes, and that's obviously the desirable, that's where you want it to go. But some people have a little chink. It's almost like a director that says, actually, this road's closed, go down the detour.
Yeah.
And we don't want that to happen significantly. So it's okay if it kind of a little bit goes down there, but if you have a genetic predisposition to that, we want to know, because then we've got the option of directing it more.
We can send it on a better diversion.
Exactly.
through nutrients.
Exactly.
Yep.
We can be more proactive
Mm-hmm.
about doing that. Yep. And then when at the beginning we talked about deactivation and clearance, and that absolutely is important. So you don't want the kind of used estrogens to be reabsorbed. You want the nice new estrogens to be doing their thing, because they're the ones that have got the clear messages. Yep. Rather than the ones that have got a whole load of background noise associated with them, like that.
Basically, estrogen can come to the T-junction. If there is a genetic predisposition for it to have a preference to turn right, that is the least favorable. And having this information is so helpful, because there are certain nutrients and diet and lifestyle impacts that we can use to navigate and divert it to either go straight ahead or turn left. And I think that this report through Life Code GX is just phenomenal. All of your reports are, but I encourage anyone listening to work with a practitioner that Emma lists on her website, Life Code GX, to integrate this into your own personal plan. And Emma and I do lots of work together, so you can sign up and stay tuned to all of the work that we do. And I can't thank you enough, Emma. You are just you're a very small package, but with an amazing brain, and such a fun colleague to be working with. So I thank you so much for your very, very precious time to coming on the Best of Health podcast. And as they say, this is the start of a wonderful relationship. And I'm sure the listeners have had a great cup of tea and listen, and they feel really informed. Thank you.
Thank you. I've loved it as usual, and I'm really, really, really grateful for being on here.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you again on the other side. Take good care.